Who doesn't know about Alice Cooper, the king of shock rock, a true rock and roll pioneer, and at the time, the ultimate juvenile delinquent? He also just happens to be a devout Christian, an avid golfer, and a reformed alcoholic. But to truly appreciate his genius, think about what music was like when he hit the scene in the late 60s, right? It was all that flower power, peace and love, hippy-dippy crap. And then Alice hit the stage and wow, he turned all that upside down. The guy had a woman's name, dressed in women's clothing. He wore makeup. His shows had mock murders, hangings, and beheadings. He invented rock and roll theater. He had his big scandalous moments, right? You may recall the killing a chicken on stage, which he didn't do, but it sure made him famous. And in the 1970s, Alice's career exploded. And you know how middle America, right? They freaked. He was the poster boy for evil, every parent's worst nightmare. But his fans always loved him. He sold more than 50 million albums, and his business model was sound. Alice Cooper was the first musician to be on the cover of Forbes magazine. Think about all those cats today talking about how they want to be business people. Alice did it first. Well, this is the year Coop turned 60. He's got a radio show 5 nights a week, and for the love of goodness, he's got his 25th studio album. He's touring it. It's called Along Came a Spider. Oh, by the way, it's about a serial killer. How very Alice. Alice Cooper. Welcome, man. Nice to see you. Good to see you, George. How are you? Good. When we do a bio on an artist, you know, you can do it in 90 seconds to 2 minutes. It's a lot. It's hard to fit all your stuff into a couple of minutes. What a long, strange trip it's been, to quote Jerry.
Well, yeah, you know, I mean, I looked around in those days, and I saw the Who and the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, and they were like, wow, they're the best in the world. But what I didn't see, I saw a lot of heroes. I didn't see any villains. There was no villain. I saw a lot of Peter Pans and no Captain Hook. And I said, well, why don't I be Captain Hook? And I created Alice to be that. I created really him to be the rock and roll's Frankenstein, Dracula, all rolled up into one.
But eventually, using the Frankenstein analogy, eventually the monster takes over.
Well, what happens is in those days, my big brothers and my big sisters were like Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin. And here's the people that were under their wing, and they're dying left and right, you know, all at 27 years old. So I think my generation had to sit back and look at that and say, okay, what do we learn from that? Do we really want to die for this?
Right.
You know, and honestly, I thought, why not separate the two characters? You have Alice, this character that loves to be on stage, loves to be this arrogant villain. And then there's me, who's nothing like him. I mean, I'm nothing like him at all. So I love playing him at night. You know, when I do my next show, I can't wait to play Alice Cooper.
Were there ever points in your career where you were like him?
There was a gray area then. I mean, at that point, I was still drinking, you know, and I was...
How many records do you not remember anything about?
There's 3 in particular where, honestly, I don't remember writing them, recording them, or touring with them. And if you ask my real true fans, you know, I say, what are your favorite albums? It's those 3 albums. But you don't expect they'd say School's Out or $1 Billion Babies. They go, no, Dada, Special Forces, and Zipper Catch a Skin. Those are the ones we love. And I'm going, geez, I don't even know one song in any of those albums.
If you go back to the late 60s, right? I mean, there was the peace and love generation. And then within a matter of 3 years, you had the Manson murders, you have the Rolling Stones and the Hells Angels at Altamont, and then you have Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, and Janis Joplin. They're all dead. And suddenly the whole thing was gone.
It changed everything. And at the same time, it was terrified everybody that these hippies that were really just wanted to go get high and live together and sleep together were out doing the most gruesome murders of all time. And you're going, really? You know, I mean, that even freaked us out. We all went out, we got guns. I mean, because we didn't feel safe.
Man, when Alice Cooper's band are afraid of the Grateful Dead, we got problems.
That's right. Yeah. But, you know, I think of it, we lived in Topanga Canyon for a while. We used to go down to the general store. At the general store was not that far away from where the Manson people lived. So we used to see those people every day, and they just looked like hippies. We had no idea what was going on up there. So, you know, you always wonder if you would have invited some of them up to the house, what would have happened. You know, I mean, it is freaky, but it did change everything. All of a sudden, these hippies that were just kind of, everything's groovy, all had blood on their hands.
Right.
you know, and now you didn't know who to trust. And so, I mean, it did change things.
The drugs didn't help, right? Paranoia sets in.
Yeah, oh man, I'm telling you, you know, but we were always, I always felt that, you know, most of those bands were always, you know, hey, it's just for the music, man. Our band was going, we want a Ferrari. We want, you know, 2 blonde girlfriends, some switchblades, and a big house. Yeah. You know, we were capitalists.
Hey, man, you made the cover of Forbes magazine before any musician had done that.
And it suddenly started getting seats in first class. It was amazing.
Yeah, people took you seriously, didn't they?
I would sit down in first class next to a guy, and he would go, oh, brother. When you're on the cover of Forbes, you sit down and a guy says, oh, let me dust that off for you here because, you know, that's the Bible for those guys, you know, is Forbes.
That does show, though, how screwed up everybody's priorities are, right?
It really is, you know. And honestly, to this day, all we ever have done or ever will do is some sort of strange vaudeville. What I do on stage is and what brought people like Groucho Marx to the shows, and Fred Astaire and Mae West used to come to the shows to see our shows because they looked at it as vaudeville. They saw a guy get his head cut off in 1927 in Toledo. Right. You know, reminds me of the time, you know, the great Malinsky used to do that. You know. That was Mae West too, right? Yeah, that was Mae. Mae West one time actually said, why don't you come over and see me some? And she really did come on to us. And
did you think about it?
Well, I thought for a second. I said, well, for one reason, you're 86. And another reason, I'm not sure if you're a woman.
But which one threw you off more? Because 86 is okay.
I think at 86, she would have been right there, you know. But she also came on to Keith Moon that night and Ringo. She was trying to get everybody in her. She was something.
No kidding. Well, that voice is perfect. Yeah. The amount of people, because you were around in the time of the last great era of those guys, like the people that the kids still wear on their T-shirts today.
Right.
When you're in the moment, do you get a sense of what's happening? Do you know it's magic? Like, you played with the Doors, and John Lennon, I believe in that night that Lennon played, Eric Clapton was with him on stage.
Right.
That's a hell of a lineup.
Well, that was a big deal for us. I mean, you know, we were all Beatle fans. Everybody in the world at that time, Beatles were the end all, and the Stones were right there too. And of course, we knew the Doors from L.A., so we knew them. But John Lennon, you know, it was still a very big deal. And playing between both of them, we look on either side of the stage, and there's Jim Morrison and the Doors, and John Lennon and his guys watching our show. And we're literally nobody at that time. Nobody had ever heard of us, So, I mean, that was the night that we actually made our stamp sort of on.
You know, my dad was at that show. He was at that, and I remember when I was a little kid, he told me about that concert because I had an Alice Cooper record. Yeah. But it freaked my mother out. And I sort of laugh now. We've talked about this. You know, my mother's a Christian. Is there any irony to the fact that Alice Cooper, that guy who terrified so many Christians, is a Christian now?
Well, no, I mean, my dad was a pastor. Yeah. My grandfather was an evangelist. My wife's father is a pastor. I grew up in a Christian home.
You teach Bible study.
And I teach I'm sort of a substitute teacher for Bible study on Wednesday mornings. And honestly, I take it very seriously. You know, but if you look at my show is still vaudeville. It's still nothing. I always love it when the really right-wing, extreme Christians are up in arms about Alice Cooper's show, and I go, okay, if I were doing Macbeth, would it be okay? Well, yeah.
They wouldn't even know what Macbeth is.
Macbeth is about incest, the occult, murder. I mean, it's far worse than anything Alice Cooper's ever done. But that's okay, because it's Shakespeare. I don't know where the line is there.
No kidding. Okay, stick around. We've got more with Alice Cooper. When we come back, we're going to ask him what he's afraid of, and just throw out some names: Jim Morrison, Groucho Marx, and get Alice's reaction. More with Cooper when the hour returns. Alice Cooper is hanging out. Part of the reason that I wear black all the time and I listen to the devil's music and I'm that guy, and my mother knows the moment when I was 5 years old and it started to slip away from her, was when I watched The Muppet Show and you came on and sang Welcome to My Nightmare, right? And it was just kind of like... And that was it. Like, that was it.
It was, you know, The Muppet Show was the biggest show in the world. And I didn't realize that, but it was the biggest show in the world at that time. And when they asked me to be on the show, I went, oh, man, I'm the villain. How can I do this show? And then I looked at who was on before me. It was Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Peter Sellers, John Cleese, and I went, I have no problem being in that company at all. So what they did was they did the, if you haven't seen the show, they did the sort of a Faust thing where I come on and try to get Kermit to sell his soul to be a rock star. And
just sign right here.
And it was a week. Yeah, it was a week of rehearsing. I mean, it was a big show. We went to London, and it was a week of rehearsal. And the funny thing is you get so locked into these characters. Miss Piggy, you know, is right here, and the guy working Miss Piggy's down there, like this. But Miss Piggy's right here. So when you're rehearsing, I'm going, okay, it'd be funnier if you put your head on my shoulder over here. Oh, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. And then I go, it would be funnier if, because you catch yourself talking to these characters, and they respond to you just like, you know, you're talking to them. So, I mean, it really was. It was a Halloween special show and everything. And I honestly never had so much fun.
That was amazing.
Doing that show.
Tell me about Groucho Marx. You knew Groucho Marx and you knew Salvador Dali.
Yeah.
Tell me about Groucho.
Well, Groucho was one of those guys. He was the American classic of all time. I mean, I don't think you can find a comedian that doesn't say Groucho was the guy. You know. Now, Groucho also, though, came to our show, saw it as vaudeville, and just loved it. And one of my favorite quotes in the world was, Alice is the last hope for vaudeville. That's how he saw it. So he started bringing all of his friends, you know. And so I'm looking at Fred Astaire, you know, and I'm going, these are the guys I want to meet. You know,
Didn't Groucho give you his bed?
Yeah, he gave me this giant round bed.
Which is a kind of a weird gift.
It is. It was this big, if you would have seen this bed like in a Fred Astaire movie, you know, going down to Rio or something, one of these big, horrible beds in the room. And I walked in one time and I saw it, and he said, "Do you want it?" I said, "Sure." You know, he says, "I never had any luck on it. Go ahead." You know. So you have to picture this like in a Groucho movie, us rolling this bed out of his house, and he's got a cigar and Mickey Mouse ears on. He's going, "Now a little more to the left. Now a little more to the right," and things are falling off the walls and everything. So finally, I got the bed at home, and we had it for 2 years. And my wife and I got invited over to Paul's house, Paul and Linda's house.
Paul McCartney.
Yeah, and he just had built, he says, "Now this is my pride and joy. It's my conservatory." And it was this round room. "It's going to be my meditation room." I said, "I have the perfect gift for this room." And he says, "What?" And I said, "It'll be a surprise." So he gets this big package, and they open it up, and they put it in there. And it's from Groucho and Alice, so you can't throw it away. You know, I mean, it's got history. And I told him, I said, when you get done with it, give it to somebody else. You know, it'll be one of those things. And so it's still there.
McCartney
I mean,
still has
it's
it.
still in the room. And he says, it's not my meditation room anymore, of course. It ruined the room. But, you know, I would like to have a history of that bed.
Yeah, I mean, you've met so many people. What was WrestleMania like with Jake the Snake Roberts?
Oh, that was, you know, that was one of the most terrifying things in the world. Talk about the Manson murders being terrifying. How about 90,000 people, wrestling fans, 60,000 of them blue-haired old ladies screaming for blood. And I'm going, I hope this isn't my audience. My audience isn't as crazy as this. That was the craziest audience in the world. They really were. And I kept thinking, they don't really believe this, do they? They don't really believe this is real, do they? You know, and I think they did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
At that time, they probably would have.
Yeah.
You know, as a man of faith who's seen religion play so prominently in politics, you know, in the United States and around the world, when you look at the face, like in Canada tomorrow, we have our election.
Yeah.
And then within a month, there's going to be an historic election in the United States. As a man of faith, where faith often gets called up, what do you think of what's going on?
Well, you know, I mean, it's who's ever going to be in gets dealt the same hand of cards. You know what I mean? Bush got dealt a hand of cards that he had to play.
Which he played poorly. And
that cards now go to the next guy. I don't think anybody's going to get in office and everything's going to change just because he's a magic guy. Yeah. You know, that just doesn't happen. We've just got to get through the certain situations. I mean, you know, I'm not political at all. In fact, in our show, we do Elected on stage, and we have, you know, Obama and McCain come on stage, and they end up fist fighting and hockey fighting and like that.
Who wins?
And Bush, well, neither one, because I'm sort of an equal opportunity satirist. Bush comes on, breaks them up, finally gets them off stage, and he's waving, and his pants fall down, and he's got an American flag and fishnet stockings on. So, you know, I said, I'm your only guy. Vote for me. You know.
Alice Cooper, he's got a brand new CD. It's called Long Came a Spider. By the way, over the next 10 days or so, Alice is playing a bunch of Canadian cities. I think he's in Kitchener tomorrow night, Montreal, Halifax, St. John, New Brunswick, then Moncton and St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Corner Brook. So make sure you check it out. Also tomorrow night, don't forget, 9 p.m. CBC Television, Canada Votes 2008. Peter Mansbridge heads up your election night coverage. Thanks for watching, everybody. That's time. Alice Cooper.
Your boy for evil, every parent's worst nightmare. But his fans always loved him. He sold more than 50 million albums, and his business model was sound. Alice Cooper was the first musician to be on the cover of Forbes magazine. Think about all those cats today talking about how they want to be business people. Alice did it first. Well, this is the year Coop turned 60. He's got a radio show 5 nights a week, and for the love of goodness, he's got his 25th studio album. He's touring it. Who doesn't know about Alice Cooper, the king of shock rock, a true rock and roll pioneer, and at the time, the ultimate juvenile delinquent? He also just happens to be a devout Christian, an avid golfer, and a reformed alcoholic. But to truly appreciate his genius, think about what music was like when he hit the... It's called Along Came a Spider. Oh, by the way, it's about a serial killer. How very Alice. Alice Cooper. Welcome, man. Nice to see you. Good to see you, George. How are you? Good. When we do a bio on an artist, you know, you can do it in 90 seconds to 2 minutes. It's a lot. It's a scene in the late 60s, right? It was all that flower power, peace and love, hippy-dippy crap. And then Alice hit the stage, and wow, he turned all that upside down. The guy had a woman's name, dressed in women's clothing. He wore makeup. His shows had mock murders and hangings and beheadings. He invented rock and roll theater. He had his big scandalous moments, right? You may recall the killing a chicken on stage, which he didn't do, but it sure made him famous. And in the 1970s, Alice's career exploded. And you know how middle America, right? They freaked. He was the post. Hard to fit all your stuff in into a couple of minutes. What a long, strange trip it's been, to quote Jerry.
Well, yeah, you know, I mean, I looked around in those days, and I saw the Who and the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, and they were like, wow, they're the best in the world. But what I didn't see, I saw a lot of heroes. I didn't see any villains. There was no villain. I saw a lot of Peter Pans and no Captain Hook. And I said, well, why don't I be Captain Hook? And I created Alice to be that. I created really him to be the rock and roll's Frankenstein, Dracula, all rolled up into one.
But eventually, using the Frankenstein analogy, eventually the monster takes over.
Well.